Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I'm continuing to review episodes from Season 1. The next one in line that I have not previously covered is The Legend, directed by Lee Phillips and written by John McGreevy, who wrote a number of episodes for the Waltons and won Emmys for writing the Waltons. If you're enjoying these, please do hit like and subscribe. In this episode, John's old army buddy, Tip Harrison, who he refers to himself as Theodore Roosevelt Harrison. He comes to visit John, and evidently for many years, John has been sharing stories about his time with Tip in the army and all these amazing funny things that happened. And so he is a legend in the minds of all of the family, and they are so looking forward to meeting him. Early on, when John Boy is getting Tip's bags out of his gorgeous car. Don't ask me what the maker model is. I'm sorry, I don't know. But as John Boy is getting bags out of the car, he notices that the registration is to a Harold Harrison, as are the tags on his luggage. John Boy finds this a little confusing. Tip is one of those larger-than-life personalities. I'm sure we've all met them, and they're hard to compete with if you're inclined to want to compete. Tip is very competitive. He is playing checkers with John Boy, and when it's clear he's going to lose, he accidentally upsets the checkerboard, and so that the game is over out, and then says, "Oh, I would have had you in a couple moves." He asks John Boy about his experience with the bear when he had to shoot the bear in the episode The Hunt, and John Boy kind of downplays it, and Tip's talking about this huge bear he got, clearly a made-up story, and John Boy just sort of lets it ride and sort of says, "Well, yeah, I'm sure that was a much better story, much bigger bear, and I'm glad I didn't run into him." So it becomes evident that Tip has this need to live this life and be this personality, and that he never quite feels comfortable to sit in his own skin. And when you do see him not with a crowd, he's rather lost. He sits in bed. He smokes and drinks in bed. And I noticed that a few times he's smoking in the house, and I was surprised that something wasn't sort of said about that, that the mama or grandma or somebody didn't sort of really scowl at him about that. But he does bring a couple bottles of champagne, and they sing, and there were a lot of songs that we used on the Waltons, and here's an example of a couple of them in this scene.
It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Mademoiselle from Armitage's parlez-vous. Mademoiselle from Armitage's parlez-vous. From Armitage's.
At times when I have done live concerts and stuff like that, I sometimes do a segment in there where I talk about some of the songs that we sang on the Waltons, and had a little medley of a sing-along with them. And A Long Way to Tipperary is one that I used here. They also do Katie later on. There's other songs that they sing as well. So these, I believe, were all public domain songs, so we didn't have to deal with the licensing and use of the songs in the show. Jason is really trying to assert himself as more of a grown-up, and he's trying to find his own place. He doesn't want to step into John Boy's shoes. He wants to be his own person, and he convinces Daddy to let him tend the trash fire, and he's going to be very careful and diligent, and he is. However, we do see that Tip is not so conscious of fire safety, and after Jason has diligently put out the fire, Tip strolls on by, tosses his cigarette, and restarts the fire. He does not confess that it was his fault, and he lets Jason take the blame for that. When Jason and John Boy talk about it, and Jason isn't sure how else it could have started, John Boy asks about what direction the wind was blowing. How could an ember get from here to there when the wind was blowing the other direction? And they happen to glance over and see Tip light a cigarette before heading into the house, and he, again, tosses a match. And they share a look. So John Boy and Jason sort of know how they think that fire started, but Jason does not tell his daddy or report it. And right at the end, after Tip has confessed that he started the fire, John says he's sorry to Jason. Jason said, well, I knew. And he said, well, why didn't you tell me? He said, well, because it didn't seem, as long as I knew, that was all that was important. And it is clearly a moment of recognition that Jason is growing into a responsible man rather than still a young boy. They've been dealing with a problem with a fox getting into the hen house. We never do actually see the fox, so this made it a little easier in terms of animal wrangling. There was another episode at some point with an actual fox. In this case, we never see the fox, but we do see a lot of Reckless. There are times where I sort of note as Reckless is barking and stuff that he's kind of barking off. You will generally notice when you see the dog that the dog's attention is focused on wherever his trainer was. So he may appear to be looking off, but he's looking for his cues and for his marks and things like that the trainer would be giving him. Because of this fox who's been getting into the hen house, finally John and John Boy, and they snag Tip and they go, great, we're going to go catch that fox. So they go off with their guns and, up into the woods and stuff like this. This would have been shot at Fraser Park because of the scenery there. I can tell that they were out in some of those larger mountainous areas. Tip is, he gets a little rattled by what's going on and lags behind. John and John Boy head off in other directions. They can't find Reckless. Tip gets spooked. He hears a sound. He fires without really finding out what's going on, and he shoots Reckless. And once he sees what's happened, he's too scared to tell someone, so he leaves the dog. They would have, the trainer would have had the dog lay down. There's red on the dog that doesn't look much like blood to me. I don't know what it was, but the dog does a good job of lying there, but is unable to convince us that he is really that seriously injured. But fortunately, he was not really injured. And then in a very sweet moment, Jason, determined to find Reckless, goes out and continues looking, starts playing his harmonica, which Reckless had been responding to earlier, and he hears Reckless bark. He finds him. And then Reckless is back home, bandaged up, and getting all kinds of attention from the family, which raises a question that I was asked by somebody recently, whether we were able to play with the dog when it wasn't actually filming and stuff. And yeah, there were times where we did play a bit with the dog, but we always had to make sure we weren't interfering with the job that the dog had to do and any commands that were going to be given to the dog for a scene. Sometimes in scenes we were supposed to be playing with the dog. Other times you'll notice that Reckless went from being a boy early on to being a girl. They lost one of the dogs. I believe it died. And so they replaced it with another similarly looking dog that happened to be female. So there you go. It wasn't supposed to be a different Reckless. We just recast. John Boy asks John who Harold Harrison is, and John tells him that Tip mentioned that he had a younger brother who was kind of a bit of a loser and, couldn't get anything right. And so it becomes evident that Tip is actually Harold, and that in trying to be big and important, he has tried to keep these stories alive, and that is what makes him feel valuable or important. And so yet another good lesson about, what we feel we need to do to be important, and where really honesty and, and truth are just really much more important than being big and important. A couple little side things. Early on in this eating scene, we're about to start Grace. John Boy's missing, so as we start to reach for Grace, Grandpa, who is on my left, kind of reaches out and sort of, you'll see, smacks my hand a bit to get my attention for Grace. And there's a second where you see that I am just a little startled. I was focused another direction, but that was just exactly the sort of thing that Will would do. Fairy and cat, come on, let's get going here. So, cute moment. One of the only times we saw John in his army uniform, then I think there was a picture of him in that. So they probably took it around the same time, so they had it for set pieces. That's what I have for you for this segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons, about the segment, the episode, The Legend. I'll be back with more Behind the Scenes of the Waltons and more Ask Judy. Thanks for watching.